time for episode 3 of season 3 of the PEBAheads. And on today's episode, we've got Michael and Scott, not Michael Scott, with us to discuss all things defense. How's it going, guys?
Great.
Going good.
Well, this is going to be a fun one because the topic that pretty important in the game and one that I don't think we've spent a lot of time discussing on previous podcasts. So, there's a recent free agent signing in the league with one of the all-time greats at the shortstop position, Pacheco, last name. I think he was with West Virginia for most of his career. Is that right, Michael? All of his career. So he finally became a free agent. And,
well, after his initial trade, I should say, but I don't think he did even play. I don't think he even played for Duluth. Not even in the minors. I don't even remember. Sorry, getting off on a tangent, but
he started late. Was he a international?
No, he was a signing, a draft pick, second rounder back in 2028, to Duluth. And then he ended up being traded. I think it was that off season. No, when did he end up getting? Next off season, he ended up getting traded to West Virginia.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
For a relief pitcher named Jeff Lawson.
Jeff Lawson was around for a while, but I don't think he amounted to very much.
Yeah, it looks like long career, but probably not not equivalent to what Pacheco turned out to be.
And I will say this one always upsets me because I was in talks with Greg back in the day to trade for Pacheco before he brought him up when he was still wasting away in AAA. And I did not jump on him back then. Wouldn't have mattered because it would have ended up in Canton/Madison, and then I wouldn't have had him now anyway. But
I think have you asked me about my shortstop? I think
multiple times, Scott.
Yes. Okay. So you and I share a similar view of defensive shortstops.
Yes,
which I think is pretty common in the league.
You'd hope so.
To highly value defense.
Most people should. If they were wise, they would. Except for me, who I've got a shitty shortstop who just hits the ball.
That can work.
Well, that's where this discussion becomes fun because it's like, defense is important, but like, what's that line of diminishing returns? Like, where is it where the defense is good enough, and then when do you consider maybe a guy that does a little bit more on offense? Like,
so can we all three agree that there are some primary defensive positions, right? And then there are some other positions that are important, and then there's a few positions that are less important. I'm not saying defense has no value at certain positions, but it has more value at some and less value at others, right? And can we agree that shortstop, center field, and possibly catcher are three of the most important defensive positions, maybe in that order, maybe not?
I would probably do catcher first,
above
shortstop second, and then center field third. At least that would be my order. And that's only because catcher it's better now. For a long time, you could get away with like a one defense catcher for the longest time that just hit the ball. And I forget which version they fixed that in. I think it was probably 23, maybe 23, 22, something around that.
Well, I know when they first fixed it, they way overcorrected. People were 100%. Playing catchers with 3 contact just because they were all defense, and they were still putting up ridiculous defensive numbers, and they were serviceable. But now I think with this version, and especially I think 24 was where it first happened, where catcher defense was still very important, but they corrected it back down to a more, I think, reasonable level rather than turning it into it doesn't matter what your guy does on offense position and put a 3 contact guy. Yeah,
And
it's
that's
just crazy
where
what it
I
was.
think you can see there's certain teams that might be behind on their information, because there are certain teams that are still out there with their like, hey, I've got my 2 contact catcher with like straight 8s or straight 9 ratings or something, and they're like, that's more than serviceable for me. But it's not necessarily the case anymore. But yeah, it is
So
interesting when you start looking through other people's teams.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I find this fascinating. I always thought shortstop was the best. It could be a little bit of bias on my part from starting with like the original version of this game, which we talked about before, which is season ticket baseball. And shortstop was like it was clearly like a bug in the game where the defense rating on shortstop back then, you get yourself a very high defensive shortstop, and mostly range error was because back then it was just range and error. I'm not even sure they had an arm rating back then, but you could really, what do the kids call it? Get the phrase, but you could nerf the thing with a high rating on defense. But I assume that it was rounded out, but I just always assumed shortstop was better. But let's dive into this catcher thing. So in this version, we've got a change in the catcher defensive ratings, what I find fascinating. I assume that these ratings were always there. It's just they've taken some things from underneath the hood and put them above the hood, or taking the hood off, or however you want to, whatever kind of metaphor you want to use. So when it comes to these defensive ratings on catcher, catcher framing, catcher blocking, catcher arm, range, and error, do you guys have like an order of importance for these different ratings that you would put? Do you think, is there a way you can kind of group some of them as more important than others? If you're looking at that whole defensive catcher situation, how would you rate those different ratings?
For me, I think originally it was catcher ability and then catcher arm is what it was. And then obviously just your positional rating. But I think after the update, it was catcher ability that was more important than catcher arm. And now that it's broken out into blocking, framing, and arm, I would still probably put blocking and framing up above arm, as far as importance. I mean, throwing out runners we're a run heavy league. Obviously, that's important, but we've got a lot of good runners. A nice arm would be great. To me, that's like the one stat where it's like it's an added bonus. I would love if he had a great arm, but at the same time, I'm gonna look at blocking and framing first. Like that guy, Lanquin King, whatever. As you saw in the stats back there last season, it was an 8.1 on the framing. I think Ortega, who I traded,
Yeah, that's actually a better screen. Let me pull the league wide
he
one up.
Still had a very nice 6.3, catcher ERA, pretty good, runners thrown out, all kind of pretty solid. But like I just moved on from him because just looking at some other options, I have some financial things I need to take care of. So I moved on from him for some slightly lesser in-house guys, but he was a big acquisition for me because blocking, it was still ability at that time, but the framing was still very evident. And this is why I say catcher is more important than shortstop. The shortstop's obviously going to affect anything that's a ground ball, anything in that area. The catcher is going to affect literally every single pitcher that you have, your entire pitching game. It can have an impact on your pitchers, the strikes they throw, strikeouts, everything. So I'm like, to me, catcher is number one now that the ratings actually matter, versus a shortstop who obviously, unless you have all your pitchers set essentially to be ground ball types of pitchers, shortstop's important for sure. It's right up there as the premium position with center field and catcher with me, but I would put catcher first.
Before I ask Sean anything, and I'm not trying to hijack this as like I'm the boss here, but if let's say we got what 1 to 10, 0 to 10 on these defensive ratings, blocking, framing, arm. Let's say you got 5s for all 3 of those, and we gave you 3 points to add to those. Where would you add those 3 points to bump up from 5, 5, and 5 on blocking, framing, catching, or blocking, framing, arm?
I think it would go, for me, it would be all framing or a combination of framing and blocking. And the arm would be the least that I would be concerned of improving at that aspect, because especially in our league, the stolen base percentage is already way higher than what typically you would see in baseball. So even having a great arm, you can still throw out runners at a higher level than your peers. But to Michael's point of every pitch, every impact, like every dice roll of a game is being impacted in some way by your catcher's ability.
So blocking, framing, I get, right? Like, they've got this whole thing on, I think it's Baseball Reference or one of these things. They'll show like each pitcher, if he's high and outside, he can frame it well X% of the time. If it's low, he frames it well X% of the time. So I get the framing thing where you can significantly increase the strikes for your pitcher if you got high framing. So I'm assuming that, you give someone a 10 at framing and all of your pitching staff is going to have increased strikes, right? But on the blocking versus the arm, isn't there some ratio of, you're trying to keep the runner from advancing with blocking. You're trying to keep the runner from advancing with the arm too. Is it just that there's so many more opportunities with wild pitches or pitches in the dirt?
I'll go back to like an old Lou Brock quote that I'll probably completely butcher, but he used to say that he never stole off of a catcher. It was always off of the pitcher. So he didn't care if the catcher had a good arm or not, because it didn't matter, because the jump that he was getting was going to be on the pitcher. And even if the catcher put a bullet down on second, if he did it right, he wasn't going to get him. So I don't know if I overanalyze or overview that, but I think to me, the blocking aspect is more about limiting pass balls or wild pitches that are going to advance a runner that way. So that's kind of why I lean more that way, because I think the running game is more controlled by like your hold runner rating with the pitchers than the actual catcher rating of the arm. It's still important. I mean, I would personally not target a catcher that doesn't have an above average arm, but I guess there's ways you could probably make an argument for maybe a guy with a ridiculous bat that doesn't have a good arm at catcher, but probably not going to be on my team.
I would lean the same way. I would avoid a catcher who's not good. I used to be able to get away with it, but not anymore.
So on the defensive value, so like let's say you got 100 OPS plus hitter. How much would you sacrifice offense? How far would you drop down under 100 on offensive production in order to get exceptional defense out of them? Where's the range? And I'm sticking with these, at least the catcher and the shortstop position, even the center field, these high defensive value positions. How much are we willing to sacrifice? I'm great. Be perfect. In a perfect world, you got an 800, OPS hitter, and they're exceptional at defense. But at some point, these are all about trade-offs. How much would you trade offensive production for defensive production at these 3 positions?
Well, I think Michael, you kind of hinted at this, depending on how your team is set up. So if you have a ground ball staff, then your up the middle defense might be a little bit more of a importance than, say, if you got a fly ball staff and maybe you're focusing a little bit more on emphasizing your outfield range or something to that regard. But one thing I noticed when I was looking at these three positions beforehand was that there were a lot of high quality center fielders that could produce on offense and were above average or great on defense. But then when you look at catcher and shortstop, the amount of players that are good at both, it's very rare. I think there's one shortstop with the Ghosts that is one of the guys that does everything. He's a great hitter and great defensive shortstop. We'll pull him up here in a little bit, but like catcher is that other type of position where it's like, what is league average for, to your point, Scott, like OPS plus, what is league average for just catchers in general? Like, which we can pull up here.
So look, forgive me, OPS plus changes position to position, correct? It's like 100 OPS plus for a catcher is not the same OPS as 100 OPS plus for a right fielder, correct? Or am I wrong in that?
I think it is equal.
Is it position based?
I think it's just it's not position based. I think
okay, so it's based
just
on
a general.
Okay.
Yeah. War on the other
slugging,
hand, though, like they have bonuses based on what position you play. So I mean, Gordon Knopp is ridiculous, but part of the reason why his WAR is so high is because he's a center fielder. If he was a left fielder, he wouldn't be getting the bonus that you get for playing that position. He'd still be above and beyond everybody else.
Yeah, are we able to sort by position throughout the league? Because now that you mentioned it, I would love to know what the average OPS is position to position in our league. That
I'm gonna pull this up. It's weird though, because I don't know, maybe this player. Oh, it's because when I had it set at qualified players, it was only pulling up one catcher.
Yeah, because I'm going to tell you, catchers, I haven't had an OPS plus catcher, above 100 in quite some time. I think I've had one, but when I get an 85 OPS plus catcher who's pretty good on defense, I feel like I'm doing well, right? You get 90, 95, you start flirting with 100 at the catcher position. You're like, oh man, I'm doing good. Obviously that's not the same thing with a first baseman, right? I don't want a 100 OPS plus first baseman. I feel like I'm doing something wrong if my first baseman is got 100 OPS plus, right?
No, I think that's fair. The only catcher that actually had enough at bats to qualify for the league-wide OPS plus. Now, if we looked at this in Stats Lab, I think it might show more players that qualify, but this kind of illustrates the point we're getting at. 117 was
that's plus. That's an offensive catcher right there. I'm assuming that's the best offensive catcher. So do we have the equivalent of the Silver Slugger, right? That's a Silver Slugger catcher, right?
Right.
Yeah, I didn't see his defensive. You got his defense up now?
Yeah, I got it up now. So like zone rating,
not horrible, but
his framing is -9. So it's like that's where it kind of
we're sacrificing some defense with this guy, but he's producing so much on offense that would any of you guys not take him, right?
I probably would only consider him as a DH or a first baseman.
Okay.
And this was the exact conversation last season with Palm Springs.
Right.
They brought in that one catcher, and then I'm like, not the greatest signing if you're planning to play him at catcher. He ended up playing him at DH, Claudio Perez, and that's where he performed. But at the end of the day, he's a crap catcher. He's
right. So let's pull up like a fielding first, like some of the top fielding catchers, and we can look at what their OPS plus is, just to kind of. I know the one that we had up earlier, Mike's guy from Aurora. think he had like an 81, or he was in the 80s for his OPS plus. Let me pull that up here.
Yeah. So while you're doing that, so, I've always agreed with your, my position has been your position, Michael. It's just, I always thought shortstop was higher, and you may be right. Catcher probably, in hindsight. What I will say now with version 25, we get a better view. They're giving us more material to look at defensive with catcher, which helps. But those three positions, I have always been willing to sacrifice some offense for defense at catcher, shortstop, and center field. Always. I do not sacrifice very much, if any, defense at first base. Maybe a tad at first base, but not much. Almost none at left field. Almost none at right field, although arm being the exception. I kind of like an arm that's better than, I don't like playing a right fielder with an arm that's 5 or below, right? I'd rather have his arm be higher than that, but I'll play a 6 arm in right field if he can hit. And then at third base, arm is the most important when you look at these things to me. I definitely consider range and error to be important at third base for me, but I'm willing to admit that I probably overvalue them according to the game's metrics. But it's just one of those things where I like defense. So if you look at my teams throughout the years, I've always had very, very good shortstops, pretty darn good second baseman, and better than average third baseman when it comes to defense. So I sacrifice a little bit of offense at catcher, shortstop, center field, and then slightly lesser degree second and third. After that, I don't sacrifice much, if any, on offense for defense. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, it's one of those where I've seen people, I'm generally the same way, but I feel like if you can get an offensive guy who doesn't kill you at one of those spots, you can also kind of flip the script on the rest of the league and have an advantage where everyone else has maybe got a second baseman that is defensive first. You've got one that's power hitter that isn't going to kill you. Nelson, my second baseman, but really it does give you an advantage because you're getting an extra bat in the lineup. And I've made the decision that rather than having a 9 or 10 rated second baseman on defense there, that I'll take 7 is good enough, and he can turn double plays, so I'm okay with it. And then also getting 30 home runs a year out of a spot that traditionally you'd be perfectly fine with 9 or 10 and turning double plays. So
would you agree, Sean, that turning double plays is like arm on a second baseman? Got to be a low play.
I could really care less what their arm is.
So range and error are important, but do you think turning double plays are slightly more important than range and arm? Or do you,
which position?
For second base.
Yeah, I think it's double play and then range and then error and then arm would be the last thing.
Okay, that's good. Mike, what about that? What about you on a second baseman?
For a second baseman, and it depends. I mean, there's lots of guides and everything that are online. You can look up people that have done, regression testing, all that fancy crap, which I just don't have the time for. To me, second base is still, and I agree, like the one that I follow, at least, it's more range, double plays, errors, and then arm is the least important. I've had plenty of second basemen with real garbage arms. It's not an important stat for them. But range to me is still important.
And more important than turning double plays.
Yeah, double plays is right up there as second.
But slightly below. Okay.
Yeah, and then errors.
What about third? What about third?
Third is pretty much arm. Arm is going to be the number one. You still want some range. Double plays don't really matter that much from third base, at least the way that the game runs. I don't know why.
That's what I've read. Look, I would think you know, as a baseball watcher, that it should be more important, but
You would
all the
think so,
stuff-
right?
Yeah, all the stuff I've read on out of the park baseball, and again, I have not run these. I used to run these things. I don't run them anymore, but the people who claim they're running them say that turning double plays for a third baseman is not very valuable.
Yeah.
It is a distant value on that spectrum.
And I agree. Shortstop, pretty much all range. I think.
Arm. So the guys that I've read who've done these evaluations, you know, runs the same season over and over again, changing these things, have said that arm on shortstop is pretty important. Not as important as range, but it's pretty important. Much more important than second or third baseman or first base. On the infield, arm is the highest rated for infield positions for a shortstop.
I mean, third base is still to me would have the
Oh,
most.
I'm sorry.
importance on
I'm sorry.
arm.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. You're right. You're
Yeah.
right.
But yeah, it's definitely more important than say second base. Second base, you're going to be closer, obviously, to the shortstop coming over to second or to first base. Shortstop, I don't know if it's as important as you're probably putting weight on it. I would still, and this is where I get a bit murky, whether double play is more important or not. Which it's like one of those, I'll use the example of how they broke down contact between BABIP and avoid Ks. Like, is turn double plays and error / arm, is that all like a subcategory? I don't know. I clearly, like you said, I don't have the time to sit here and do it. I just go off of the years and years I've been playing it and what I've been seeing and the little stuff that I do read. For me, it's still range, turn double plays, and then it's kind of a toss up between arm and error. But the other interesting thing though is like it's important to at least have a basic understanding of this, because if you're sitting there wasting winter ball CP points trying to improve them, you want to make sure you're improving the right stats. Like, don't go out of your way to give your second baseman an arm if it's not going to do anything for him actually defensively.
Yeah, I mean, I think range up the middle is always a good thing to consider. I've had shortstops in the past with lots of range with like a middle tier error rating, and sometimes it's alarming because you'll see how many errors that they have, and you're like, oh, I can't have this guy there anymore. But then you kind of sometimes have to take a step back with that too and realize that they're getting to balls that other people aren't going to get to. So it counts as an error, but it's really not like it would be a hit for somebody else. So it's hard sometimes with this game because you're like trying to rationalize things that are in a data form to your understanding of baseball, and sometimes it doesn't check out that way. I know, like with shortstop, you would assume turning double plays would be like one of the most important things after range, maybe, but it's not as important as second base's double play rating.
So I've read the same thing. So here's what again, based on, because all the stats based stuff that I did was in way previous versions. I haven't done anything since the 22 version, but they say from reading shortstop, they say range, error, arm in that order. And then a distant, fourth is double plays, because for some reason the game just doesn't, it's got second baseman dominating the double play starting, Then on second base, they got double plays, range, error, and then a long distance, and your fourth is arm. And then on third base, it's arm, then range, then error, and a lot of distance, and then double plays. That's the stuff that I've read, in Reddit posts and out of the park forum posts and all that stuff. Seems to hold up from what I've seen with the game. Again, not all logical when it comes to actual baseball. Sometimes you're like, that doesn't make sense, but the game doesn't always track with real baseball.
Exactly.
Yeah.
On center field, where do you guys rank them? If you're looking at, arm, range, error.
That, at least for me, that one's just, it's similar to probably any of the up the middle positions. You're more concerned about them getting to the ball, giving them the range. They've got the most field to cover. So range is obviously number one. I'm not expecting the guy to throw the ball back into the field. I'm hoping he just doesn't drop the damn thing. So probably for me, it's going to be range, error, and then arm.
Yeah, that's what I've got.
Yeah. No,
I think
agree.
outfield, since it's only 3 ratings, it tends to be a bit more simplistic. Obviously, right field, the arm's more important than any of the other 3 positions. Try to keep a guy at first and try to limit the double play or the second base.
So on the corner
position and everything.
Yeah, I was reading some posts on Reddit and on the out of the park forums that say that when it comes to like the corner outfield defensive positions, when it's range and error, getting below 5 can be very harmful. But once you get to 5 or 50 on the 100 scale, I don't care how you want to do this, or 40 on the 80 scale, once you get to that halfway point, getting above the halfway, you have very limited returns. So you can harm yourself team-wise, but by being way below the halfway point. But the difference between a 5 on a 10 scale and a 10 doesn't give you a lot in wins. Don't sacrifice very much offense between 5 and 10. But you might want to sacrifice some offense between 1 and 5. Like, you don't want to be a 1 or a 2 or a 3. Like, the difference between a 2 and a 3 can be huge. The difference between a 7 and an 8, they don't think is very high. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? You don't really know?
I think it's important. It's important to bring up, because I think sometimes someone will be like, "Oh, I have a 10 rated first baseman on defense," and I'm like, I don't really care. Like, I'm more focused on what are they going to do on offense. It's not like real baseball where you could have somebody like an Anthony Rizzo that's above and beyond his peers, or a Paul Goldschmidt at digging balls out or coming off the bag and generating outs that way. I don't think the game is like crediting players like that to that extent. So yeah, like the corner spots are definitely ones that I'm looking at. I don't really care the difference between a 7 and an 8. I just want that above a 5, or a 5 would be
like these are exploits, right? But I think that in these exploits, I think there's enough balls hit in the game that you don't want really, really low ratings at some of these lower value defensive positions. But once you get to average, the difference between average and great on defense is not that significant, where they're just saying don't sacrifice a lot of offense at your left field, your right field, your first baseman. Or do you think they're wrong in that? Can you poke holes in that theory, Mike?
I think before we get into that, we should probably take a commercial break.
We need a Sven and Ollie's pizza.
Yeah, it's time to take a road trip up the North Shore to Grand Marais. Oh, I'm so hungry for a Sven and Ollie's pizza, I could eat a horse.
Let's stop at Gooseberry.
Oh, the Split Rock Lighthouse.
Are we there yet?
Sven and Ollie's, home sweet home.
Yeah, there's no trip like a road trip to Sven and Ollie's in Grand Marais.
All right, we're back after paying the bills, and we're going to dive a little bit more into the minimum ratings that you're looking for at those non-traditional defensive positions, but still important enough that where do you draw that line? I'm not going to put you on this. Oh, you're good now. I was going to say I was going to let you chew a little bit more.
My face is thoroughly stuffed.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think there's merit to what you're saying, Scott. Once you get past, at least for certain positions, right? Maybe left field, maybe right field. I don't know about first, but probably more or less first is lumped in there as well. We can talk about first, because first is interesting, because I think you actually have to, if I remember correctly, I think the player's height actually has an impact on their fielding at first base too. But so it's like an extra caveat that's unique to that one, not in any other position. But to your point, does defense really matter? If you just go to like a player search with everyone in PEBA, sort by WAR, because let's just do it that way. And you do right field. And really, what's the difference between someone that's going to be at the top, like Masami Sanu in Crystal Lake, who played all 149 of his games in right field, had a 8.5 zone rating, over 1 efficiency rating at a 5.9 WAR, while batting 285, hitting 31 home runs, right? What's the difference in his defense at right field is a 9 for your reference, versus what does it matter when you compare him to Thomas Martinez, who's almost 40, a 6 in right field, or even Tomomi Harada, who was at a 5.3 WAR, batting well as well, but only a 6 in right field. You have a lot of these guys that are all bouncing around in the right field section that are 6s, 7s, 8s, 9s. It really doesn't matter. They're all, because of their bat, they're all within like 1 to 2 WAR of each other for hitting 20, 30 home runs, batting 280 to 290. At that point, it really, to me, probably doesn't matter once you kind of get above that 5. And I did have an example, I forget, because I've already clicked off of him at this point. I did have a name somewhere here. That was a 5. Nope, might have been a 6. But I mean, I hear what you're saying, Scott, and I do agree. I think for some of these less prime positions where defense is more important, the defense at their position is not as important. Like, look at that, -6 zone rating for Martinez. He's less than a 1.0 efficiency rating. He's not the greatest fielder. He's obviously older. But are you going to give up what was his bat for the year? He almost hit
4.7 WAR, 36
almost
home
back to his
runs.
40 home runs, 20 something stolen bases, 100 plus RBI.
Yeah, no. Look, again, it's a balance, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
The thing you want to avoid, and this is, I think, what it all comes down to, is this is what you want to avoid. And the Hartford has done better because I think 25 has changed some of their ratings. But if you go back a season or two, Hartford, and I ragged on them in previous years of podcasts, was literally full of guys with nothing but like 9s and 10s ratings in their defense and like 2 and 3s in their bats. And they squeaked through 1 year based on their pitching staff. But then they fell off immediately right after that. It's like that does not work. So what they squeaked through in
I think it was 2038.
Yeah. 2038, where they got close. And they didn't even make the playoffs that year. And I think 31 was when they last made it. But their team was literally based on nothing but defense, guys that could not hit. Well, it was guys that could not hit or only hit for power. And
like this guy with 33, Peter Monington, 33 home runs, but batted 216. Like,
yeah,
229
3.3 WAR. But do you want him on your team? I don't want a guy hitting 216 on my team.
It better be like Kyle Schwarber getting on base.
Yeah. No, I would take him, but not without people who could get on base in front of him. But if you got a bunch of those players, I would take him as one player like that, right? One guy that I'm hitting 4th or 5th or 6th. But if I noticed there were other guys who were in the upper 20s there, home run wise, which are not bad, but their averages were just, and their on base percentage was just garbage. You can't have a team full of that, right? Yeah. That's not a recipe for winning. You can it's
a lot of solo home runs.
You can have a player like that on your team, and he could help you. He could help you win. but you can't have a team of those people. You need other stuff. I tend to lean towards on base percentage, but then I'll admit, if I've got a bunch of high on base percentage, but nobody's got any power, that's not the greatest either, right? You want to find a balance. So can we look at the Pacheco signing?
Yeah, let's pull that up here.
I've got some questions on some of the stats because I was looking, because we were discussing some of this stuff privately in Slack, and I thought it was an interesting conversation. We had some disagreements, and I was looking at, he's got some very, very, very interesting defensive stats, and not the greatest offensive producer. Definitely a big contract. I think it de-escalates, which I think is a big plus. If you just look at, I think the first year is 38 million, right?
Yeah, 38.
When I looked at the first year, I was like, and I looked at the total, I was like, oh my God, that's horrible. But when you look at this page, you're like, okay, big first year, drops down significantly, and then there's some team options. So it looks better once you recognize that there's some wiggle room for the team. My question for you guys, if we go to the defense or the fielding stats, let's go to his fielding stats.
Before we do,
got great ratings, right?
Yeah, just let's point, because I pointed this out in chat.
Yeah, great ratings.
Pacheco is a unicorn. He is the only player in PEBA with straight 10s for defensive ratings. So, I mean, that he is one of a kind. There is nobody else like him. He has full ratings at every single infield position.
I think I've got some players, and again, we're probably looking at OSA, right?
Yep.
Yeah. He's a unicorn. He's an unusual player according to my scout, but he's not a unicorn according to my scout.
What kind of scout do you have?
I think he's pretty good with majors.
Just more so, meaning,
is he like a tools or
yeah,
that's a good question. Yeah,
that's what I was more referring to.
Okay.
Is he a tools
I
catcher, or
I don't know. I wasn't going to look. I don't know off the top of my head, but we can agree that his ratings
ability. Found it for you.
Phenomenal.
there you go. Oh yeah,
I keep cutting you off, Scott. I apologize.
That's okay. That's okay.
I think we all agree he is an elite defensive shortstop in this league. Like there's but it's like, where do you draw the line on?
It's all the stuff we talked about before.
Yeah.
601 OPS, 72 OPS plus. That's not great, Bob. I've got, if that was my catcher, and Michael, we already agreed that you've convinced me to move up catcher from shortstop. If my catcher was 72 OPS plus, I'd be like, it'd be really nice to get that up a little bit. Would I pay, would you pay 38 million?
So this is where it's unique to each team. And this is where, like, would I pay 38 million for this guy? No. 100% no. But, like, for instance, and this is probably the controversial thing I said in our just group chat, would I take Pacheco at his contract over Ortiz that I have right now and his contract? I would take Pacheco.
What about my shortstop, who you've inquired about? He's fallen off. His defense has fallen off, and he's not old.
But see,
Pacheco's defense is far superior to my guy. Even though my guy is a multiple Gold Glove winner, for some reason, his defensive stats, and bring up Pacheco's defense. If you look up at his stats, so range factor, zone rating, defense efficiency, and fielding percentage, right? These are the things on stats that we're looking at. And if I look at my guy, he doesn't look very good recently when it comes to defense efficiency and zone rating. He's had better days, but this guy, this Dave Pacheco, 34 years old, and remember that they just
click career fielding.
career.
Oh,
They just did this update, right, where they said they're going to make age be a bigger factor when it comes to fielding drop off, and they're going to make body type. I looked at this guy. Yes, he's 34, but he's like 5'10", like 190 or 180. I'm going off the top of my head. He's not a sloppy guy, so he's got less likely that he's going to drop off other than the age. But his defense efficiency and zone rating are off the charts, better than my guy who's won multiple Gold Gloves.
And it's interesting because despite being in the league in West Virginia for 7 seasons, how many seasons is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 seasons, 7 seasons, because there's some duplicates there for different positions.
Yeah, I just realized that there's second and third base in there, but
you take that away and he's only won 3 times because somebody else has had a more extraordinary season. And I will say this, the Gold Glove thing is an issue for me because I feel like it's
voting. Don't forget, it's voting. Sometimes guys win that shouldn't win.
It's a popularity contest.
That's
more
just
so
the way it works. However, the question for you guys, because I look at this page a lot that we're on right now with my players, especially my shortstop, and where do you value, like, the EFF is defensive efficiency, the ZR is zone rating, and the RNG is range factor, and obviously PCT is the fielding percentage. If you rate these, just like we were doing before with the fielder ratings, give me your order of, like, if you were to look at these, what's the most important? What do you look to first? What do you think, how do you value these? Is there no way to value them, or is there one more important than the others?
For me, it's zone rating. Okay. Zone rating is number one. And
his zone rating is off the charts.
20 plus a year, which is insane.
Again, I've got a shortstop that is no slouch that people come asking for all the time, that I am very, very happy to have. And his zone rating and defensive efficiency are nowhere near that guy's.
Right.
Like, career-wise, and I've got a better than average shortstop, and he's not touching this guy. So are we looking at a scenario where a guy is just so far ahead of the league when it comes to defense?
He's definitely up there. And this is where I think it's kind of reverse to what we were talking about earlier, where, the 5 to 10 scale on a right fielder, left fielder, first baseman might not be important. Whereas like even adjusting one from like an 8 to a 9 or a 9 to a 10 is going to have a significant impact on a shortstop, or significant impact on like one of the premium defensive positions. Because even for myself, not even just looking at your guys, Scott, who, yes, I've gone after Schmidt multiple times.
He hits better.
Very, very solid.
He hits better.
He's just solid all around.
Derek Jeter, but he hits better than Pacheco. It's just he doesn't have the stats.
Yeah, he doesn't have the zone rating anywhere. I mean, if you average,
fielder ratings are not far below. I mean, I know the problem is when you get to 10, we're not seeing how far above 10 it is. So there's some curtain, behind the curtain stuff that we don't know, under the hood stuff that we don't know. But, when I look at the two, I go, on ratings, they're not that far off. They could be. I just don't see it. But on stats, I see a big difference between zone rating and defense efficiency. Not so much on range factor, if I remember, and fielding percentage. So you go 1 on zone rating, Michael. What's your number?
I go 1 on zone rating. I'd go efficiency 2.
2.
And just to your point, that same exact example, your guy Schmidt has like a 0. Whatever, I'm gonna just assume that's baseline zone rating. Doesn't get a huge impact, but he has a slightly better bat. His WAR is like 2 something. If I go to Pablo Ortiz,
it's been higher.
Yeah, I go to Pablo Ortiz, who's obviously got the much bigger bat. His zone rating is actually in the negative. His range is similar, in the 4s, same as Schmidt, same as Pacheco. They're all in the 4s in range. Range doesn't really seem to matter. It's the zone rating. Well, at least the range stat. I don't know what that 4 equates to, because I mean, Ortiz is an 8 in infield range. Is that the same as Pacheco's 8 or 10 in infield range, even though his range stat is a 4 something? I don't know what that RNG really equates to then at the end of the day, range
So
factor.
it's more of a questionable stat. It's like not sure what this means.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the stat, their defense is driven by actual infield range, the range factor score, whatever. I think once, probably similar to what you were saying about that 5, like once you hit like 7, 8 something, it's all going to be in the stats. It's going to be like a 4, whatever, doesn't matter. But maybe that impacts then, I don't know, into the equation to affect everything else. But like Ortiz and all of them, though they're not the greatest defense, Schmitz on paper looks like a great defender. But when you like put him next to Pacheco, they're either terrible or pedestrian. That's the thing. Like he is to me, he is the, why can I not remember his freaking name right now?
Like Omar Vizquel. Like
I
was gonna say the Knopp. He's the Knopp of shortstops, not from the batting perspective, because obviously Knopp is the whole package, right? But
that's the problem I see is Knopp plays a quality position, and we'll admit he's not the most important, but he's one of the top 3, and he's got the bat. I don't think it's a fair comparison.
It's not, but from a, I guess why I use that comparison, because while Knopp is probably what most people would agree is the best player in the entire league.
What do you think Knopp would get on the free agent market?
Oh, he would get 40 plus.
40 or 50 million.
He'd have to get more. If 38 is all defense at shortstop and not much offense.
Well, you have to go what people even can afford. That's the thing. Like, can somebody afford a $60 million contract without completely tanking the entire team?
If I was Yuma, I would give him the most money ever just to have him, just to take him away from everybody.
You couldn't. That's the problem. I don't think Yuma's.
They could dump some salary, because if you got league minimum, you got a lot of room there. A lot of room there.
He struggled to pay both of his top starting pitchers. This is exactly the Charleston situation in 3 to 4 seasons. They don't have the budget. They don't have the.
So you bring up a good point, Michael. So you defended this against, I apologize for outing Sean, but for Sean and I, for questioning this signing, right? Do you see this, because of the way it's structured, is being a not bad signing? Because you tend to, and you've opened my eyes to some of these things when it comes to hindering future years. You don't see this as a hindrance to Gloucester?
So they're in a similar boat to like Charleston and Yuma, more or less. They only had a couple contracts. Like maybe there's like 1 or 2 that are bad on there. His catcher, I would not have paid what he paid for his catcher, but he's got a very more or less rebuild team that he's trying to bring the young guys up. Can he get away with paying Pacheco what he's paying him? I think the team option saves him, because after 2 years
he can pay a few million to dump it, and then because if he needs that for other people through arbitration, he could just pay. I think it was $5 million. It was not a giant chunk to get that off his books if he had to.
Yeah. I think it was like 5 or I don't know what it is. Let me see what it is. It's
I looked at it earlier. It was
$3 million.
$3 million.
3 million. Yeah.
So I mean, I don't see it that bad. I think that his team is young enough around him where, hey, if he can at least be competitive and start moving the team in the right direction, he's going to eventually fall off the books. I can see him going 2 years and then just having him fall off the books and pay him out and leaving him. You take a chance of 2 years of trying to at least start to increase your market, start to move in the right direction. I don't have an issue. I mean, I don't think he's going to win. It's not like the Fishermen are going to come out of nowhere and pull off the Charleston 60 extra wins, whatever, and all of a sudden they're in the playoffs.
Right.
They're
But
not.
there is a time to start winning. We talked about him before,
Exactly.
and he needs to start winning. So
Exactly.
from that perspective, I'm in agreement with you in that you need to start making some moves that put some wins on the board, because getting into the 500 club, right? And then moving the much harder part, moving past the 500 club and getting, competitive and challenging for the division. Those are steps that usually take a couple of seasons to accomplish. Yeah. Going from last to first in one season is really hard to do.
He overpaid him to snag him. But that's the thing, he had competition. So it's not like he just arbitrarily said, I'm going to pay this guy 40 million.
Well, I'll admit I have put in bids on players that I have no interest in getting in order to keep them from going cheap.
Must I remind you, Joe Riley? just shout out to Lenny while we're at it.
I am not
Joe Riley. Don't put in an offer of a guy you don't want.
I am not admitting to causing Lenny's problems, but I have put in offers on people that I've been like, I don't really need him, but if I can get him, I'm going to make him pay $2 million more if I don't.
Well, yeah, $2 million more is fine, but if you're cranking up,
I don't
original bid.
I don't make a 10 million. I've got 2 offers in right now on people. I'm like, nah, do I really want them? I think they're going a little low. I think they need a couple million more. I'm probably not going to get these guys because it's not like I'm the only one bidding on them, but I'll give you $2 million for a position that I could use. And I got a roster spot where I could send somebody down to the minors and it's not going to break my bank. I'm going to spend $2 million if I lose. And it's what, a 10, 20, 30% chance that I actually get the guy.
So how often do you guys look at in game where it shows the suspected teams interested in that player?
Very often.
So that's where part of this for me kind of goes into the why I don't understand the move, because one of the other teams that was openly bidding was Florida. And if you let Florida pay this kind of money for this type of player, they don't get to keep a Knopp in a couple seasons down the road, or a Vito, or retain. I know they have a couple young players that they need to re-sign after this season. So they have to start making those difficult decisions. So I was looking at this from a more strategic long-term perspective of, let a team like Florida waste 30-some million on a defensive shortstop when that handicaps them moving forward, because they're going to have to let go of someone that's, in my opinion, way more valuable. But don't let that fool you. Just because someone's interested, they could have thrown in a measly $5 million offer, and he's technically offer. Yeah, he's technically listed as he's interested. I've had that before too, where I put in an offer, whatever it was, whatever amount, and then somebody came in and raised it by another 20 million. I'm still listed as interested because I put in an offer at some point. So that doesn't mean I'm competitive right now with that whatever final offer is. Well, what we do know is someone was bidding with Gloucester.
Yeah,
like, and nobody teams. And when I asked that on the forum, no one admitted to who the person was that was also bidding on it. So we do know it wasn't just a person bidding against themselves. Like, there's multiple people that were.
So when I bid on a player in free agency, they usually say another team, something along the lines of another team is interested, and then they give me a suggestion. I always assume that suggestion is in the ballpark, but higher than what they've received in an offer.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah.
They're not just making up a number for you and saying,
it's not just artificially negotiated.
I rarely go super high on that unless I really, really, really want someone, which is, I can't remember the last time I've done that in free agency, because I tend to be much more attached to drafted and developed guys. I don't have an attachment to this free agent guy. I'm renting a dude that, I have no emotional attachment to, other than I think he might make my team better. So I've gone, like, if they've suggested X, I've gone a few $100,000 more if I thought that I really could use this guy, but I almost never go 1 million or 2 million more. I don't remember doing that. Do you guys like way overbid from what the suggestion is if you really, really want them?
Depends. I mean, that's the answer to everything.
Depends on who the player is. Yeah.
Depends on who the player is, what the position is, what my need is. Like if I'm desperately like lacking at that position and like that's the answer, then yeah, I might go higher, like significantly higher just to secure it. And I have done
Just
that.
to shut it down, yeah.
Yeah, because
Like,
it's I need this.
I get this move if it was a team that was on the verge of making the playoffs or a team that was already in the playoffs that needed that final piece to what they feel puts them over the edge. My biggest problem with it is that I think you can spend $38 million in a lot of different ways on a lot of shorter term commitments that improve your team 3 to 5 years from now versus the short term. I got this guy. It doesn't, I know we've talked in the past about just, how many games out of a playoff position you are. And it's hard for me to understand when you're 44 games out of your division, how spending $38 million in a season on a defensive shortstop is going to do anything to help your situation. And that was my biggest just confusion on it, because I think there were guys in the free agent market that were 9 and 10 range shortstops that went for $3 to $5 million a year that were way younger that could have been purchased, and then those funds could have been allocated somewhere else. So it's just hard to understand that aspect of it for me.
From an
and I don't want
irrational-
to beat up on.
But from an
Other
irrational
GMs too,
perspective, I have not looked to see like, is he deficient in this area or that area? Could he have sent a 22-year-old left fielder back down to AAA to season some more and overpaid for a left fielder on the open market and gotten a better shortstop option? I don't know. I didn't look that deep into it. But sometimes I have overpaid for something or made a move just because I want a season where I'm watching that guy make plays. So it's possible that he's just going, I've got the budget. And he did, to his defense, he did shape this thing in a way where it's not a long-term situation. He's got 2 years. And maybe he's just going to enjoy watching, because I've done this. He's going to enjoy watching that guy, field like a mofo for 2 years. And it's just
I want some gold gloves. That's all.
Just gonna bring some smiles to his face every time the sim downloads, and he's kicking the shit out of our teams with stellar defense.
Just looking at that league history, that team breakdown. How many gold gloves do you have? I got 2 for the 2 years I kept them. I mean, I'm in 100% agreement with you, Scott. Like I don't have an issue with this because one, he's not, to Sean's point, he's not going to compete. Could he have gotten more useful pieces? Yes, that would have been the route I would have taken. Like I said, I wouldn't outright go pay this guy $40 million, like just out of the blue. I would not have done that. I would have looked to spread the money around, used it in international, whatever. I would have found out a different way to help the rebuild. But to say screw you to everyone else that wanted him for cheaper, I mean, he had competition it's not like he was probably setting the rate. Somebody else did it. He matched it, went above, whatever. He's got the guy for 2 years. At the third year, that's much more reasonable. He could move him if the age thing doesn't impact him too much and he continues being this.
Oh, yeah,
he continues being this amazing, what's it called? Fielder, like, you have a chance to move him in year 3 instead of or you can buy him out for $3 million and move on. To me, no harm, no foul. And you get to, like you said, you get to enjoy watching this guy potentially get you some gold gloves and the rest of the league not have access to him. So kind of like a giant cock block.
I like it.
It's why not? It doesn't hurt him. He's clearly not going to compete this year, next year, but if it puts more wins on the board and starts moving him in the right direction until he is ready, go for it. I mean, he does have some young talent in the wings that are probably a couple seasons away still. So I see this as just that I have money to spend. Could he have used it better? I would have used it differently. But I don't have an issue with it. And I would gladly take Pacheco for where my team is right now, or where my struggles are for my team. I would trade him Ortiz for Pacheco. I would take that contract because I value defense more, and I would be happy to. And unfortunately, what's his name? So I mean, you're getting almost 4 WAR out of this guy anyway.
Out of defense, yeah.
Out of defense alone. Whatever you get additional from his bat, he's not that far off than my 30 home run, 100 RBI guy. And I know I've said this before, and you guys have laughed at me, like too much home runs, too much hitting. I mean, look at some of like Pablo Garza over in Okinawa. When he freed up and moved Ortiz, Garza instantly went back into beast mode, triple crown winning, home run smacking, like
47 home runs, batting 320.
Exactly. You relieve and unclog your lineup, and you give the guys that can succeed a better chance at succeeding. Like, I have probably too many home run guys or too many big bats. It's difficult for me to play with my lineup, and because everyone wants to be in the freaking cleanup position, and you're pissing guys off by not putting them in their cleanup position. You're going to have to start flexing guys. They don't do well in the 7th position in the lineup versus the 3rd or the 4th. And it starts turning into like a logistical headache. So that's what I'm saying. I'm okay with a guy like this
for a team like you.
Yeah.
But I don't think it makes sense for a team like Gloucester.
It goes back to saying every answer is depends.
Gloucester.
Gloucester. It's very clear that I need to share the screen quick, but I need to rewatch The Perfect Storm multiple times to get the correct pronunciation of Gloucester. Gloucester.
I have no idea. It's been a very long time since I've seen it, but
it's a good movie.
Great movie, yeah.
If we are going to talk about this team ever again on the podcast, it should be required viewing for us.
Well, I told you guys while we were in the break that I think it was like one of the early DVDs that my parents got when DVDs came out, because it was like right around year 2000 and right when that whole thing started. So it was a big deal with the graphics they had at the time. Going from VHS to that.
You're making me feel old, since I was 30 years old in 2000.
Just think of all the technology you've seen in your life, though. Honestly, like it's kind of wild to think that.
I remember the internet when it first came out. A friend had dial up. He had a phone that he put on. He's like, "You got to see this." It was called CompuServe. And he was raving about this thing. And I remember raving in his basement about how this is going to revolutionize everything. And I'm like, what are you talking about, dude? And he was kind of onto something. I'm not sure all for the good, but it definitely changed our lives.
Definitely probably not for the greatest, but hey, we're here. We have a podcast, right?
It's great for porn, right? Porn and podcasts. Like, I just want to talk about one more stat, though. I mean, I know we went through all of the defensive ratings, which I think are very fascinating, and the values that we put on those. And we talked about the defensive statistics and how we value those and evaluate those. There's one defensive statistic I don't think we talked about yet, and that is catcher ERA. So I was looking at that today. It's very interesting how we've got this CERA stat for catchers that stands for the pitcher's ERA when that catcher is at the backstop. And how do you value that? And how much do you look at that when it comes to evaluating your own catchers or catchers that you're looking at?
I'll jump in, I guess. For me, I don't pay too much attention to it because I think it's just reflective of everything that's going on. It's reflective of your catcher's framing, your catcher's blocking, your actual pitchers. Obviously, his ER, to me, the better, I mean, yeah, it can definitely be a gauge of how good he is overall. But at the end of the day, I also think it's dependent on your pitchers as well. You can have a really good catcher and really crappy pitchers and have a high CERA, you know?
So if you were able to look, like, just let's take the starters, because it's hard to look at, I don't know, 12 or 13 different pitchers. But if you were to take a catcher on a team and then look at, say, the 5 starters or even the top 3 or 4 starters, and if the catcher's ERA is below most of those starters' ERA, do you immediately go, well, this guy's obviously adding value, right?
I mean, he is adding value because it definitely takes into account, like I said, it takes into account those ratings and how good of a catcher he is. I think it's just more indicative of
too many factors, right?
Yeah, it's the thing. At the end of the day, it's too many factors. It's how good is your pitching staff as well as how good is your catcher, and it just amplifies. It's just that much. He's that much better because he's got a good pitching. I mean, if you go to that top one, it was 235. I mean, you look at Florida's pitching staff and 3 of their guys are in the 2s. It's
right.
I mean, is it really a question of whether he's a good catcher or not? I mean, he's got a high frame rating, everything. It's just one adding to the other. If you threw a really crappy catcher in there in Florida's staff, he might have crappier framing, crappier blocking.
Yeah, what does it add to their overall team ERA?
Their ERA is going to go up a bit, but is it still going to be probably like at 3 something? Like mid 3s, low 3s, probably, but his pitching staff is just that good. Same with like Tempe. He had a really good pitching staff too.
And that's what it comes down to when you look at these stats. Every time I look at one, I'm asking myself, how much noise is in this stat?
Yeah.
How much is raw good info and how much is just noise? And I don't know the answer to all that. You know, it's great when you feel like you've got a stat that you say, okay, because there's certain stats that I look at that I assume are none of them are noise free. Every stat that we look at has got some noise in it, but
Yep.
I want low noise stats, right? What would you consider, like, on a pitching side, on a hitting side, or even on a defense side, would be a low noise stat? Like ERA is interesting, right? You know, I love ERA plus because then it's going towards the average. I love OPS plus. You know, as we talked about earlier, I wish OPS plus could then be sorted out from position because that would help more. You know, are there stats that are go-to stats for you guys that give you a clearer, somewhat noise-free picture of that individual?
I think for the catching one, like the framing one stands out to me, like, and it just so happens Cortez is at the top of both Sarah and framing, but that one, it's because it's getting outs that generally other catchers are not getting with the framing rating, but it's still hard to put a dollar value on. You know, his is like 15. I think the second place person was 8. So it's like,
Yeah.
How much better is that? Like, where do you draw the line? Like,
It's almost double, but what's double worth? I don't know.
right.
Yeah. It's probably not a huge drop off. And like, how significant is it truly when you're comparing Florida, who had 109 or 110 wins, and this amazing pitching staff, and nothing wrong with Mike's guys, but he was barely straddling 500. And I mean, sure, he had one of the best catchers, but it's not enough of an impact to make up 20 extra games, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, for me, for like pitching, I try to like ignore wins, losses. They're important to look at the end of the day. That's kind of like the CERA. It's nice to look at. I'm happy when it's good, but everything else has to be working as well. Too many variables. Like you said, there's a lot of noise in that. Same with a regular pitcher's ERA. I'll probably start with their like K per nine, their walks per nine, their home runs per nine, and see how they're
I look at those
individually.
often. Yeah,
Yeah.
I look when I'm looking at free agents, I look at my best pitcher and my average pitcher, and I write down Ks per nine, walks per nine, home runs per nine, and then I look at the free agent guys career wise and go, hey, who's in the ballpark? Who's better? You know,
Yeah, that's
again, past performance is not necessarily indicative of future performance, but it can give you a real good look at what you might have future.
Well, even
100%
like
agree.
comparing the difference between the Florida catcher and the Aurora catcher, the zone rating there's a huge gap there. Like I believe Aurora has like a 6.9, and then Florida's catcher is like a 1 point something. Hold up here, 1.9. So it's like, yeah, how much is it? Are you benefiting from a good staff versus the actual catcher rating? It definitely is a little bit more of that gray area on which is which, but I don't know, it's kind of like the star rating. It's something that you look at start, but it's not the overall definitive rating of how you evaluate that player. Like you look at it, all right, now I need to go look at 5 other different things to see if what I think
Exactly.
I'm seeing is what I'm actually seeing.
It's like I like one stat. Well, let me go check about 14 more just to confirm that that one stat's saying what those other 14 make me think you're saying.
Yeah. So I mean, this has been a long-winded it depends episode.
It depends on a whole lot of shit.
We're like a bunch of lawyers, right? That's
Yeah.
what a lawyer tells you. Well, yes, but
I don't want to go to court.
Yeah, take these 20 more things into account, and then we'll have a conversation. And it's still going to be iffy one way or the other.
defense.
Yeah. Hey, it's important, man.
I will say that a run saved is worth more than a run earned. And I will leave this podcast with that.
Fair.
And you can tell me how I'm wrong next time or in the comments.
Can we just really, before we end, can we talk how atrocious Joe Riley is?
Oh, yeah, we have to.
Worst signing ever.
Like,
Negative 70 zone rating over his career. Oh my God, terrible.
Like
who would sign, like what kind of drugs would you have to be on to sign that guy?
A lot of drugs.
I mean,
Some
a third
hard
baseman
stuff.
with a 6 arm. I mean, just truly elite. They're right there.
We just talked about that.
I know. It's bad.
Maybe that the Bakersfield GM should watch this podcast, and
if
he might learn something from it.
He might. And if I were the Bakersfield GM, I might put him at second base.
He just very well might opt out. Who knows? Maybe he doesn't like Bakersfield that much and he will opt out. Just saying. There's that possibility. You never know.
What would be great is if he signed with someone else and became a superstar. That would be phenomenal.
Just
it is wild.
Bad again.
Yeah. It's wild how when he was with New Jersey, take the 1 year where he really went off. But I mean, the previous year he was at 3.6 WAR with 40 steals and was still batting somewhat respectable with like a 114 OPS plus. I mean, he's still above average, but not for the money that our good buddy is paying him.
Completely random, but look at 37 versus 38. Stats are almost identical, yet WAR is 2 points higher.
Ooh.
How do you explain that? Literally almost identical stats between the 2 years. And yet
was that the increased home run year?
Does it matter?
I'm just trying to figure out what
his stats were almost legitimately 1 for 1 from year to year.
I'm just wondering. I'm trying to remember back what year was the year when the whole entire league had inflated home run stats.
I think that was 39 when he hit 49.
So that would be okay.
But yeah, I mean, 38 versus 37, almost same home runs, RBIs, hits, doubles.
Yeah, only a
average
2
on base, and yet a 2
OPS plus difference.
A 2 OPS or a 2 WAR jump from year to year. Like this is why you can throw the WAR out the window at times. It doesn't make sense.
Do we think
Weird.
anybody other than Lenny is watching to this point?
Everyone else has turned it off, and we're just going to keep going. Lenny, we just had to throw you in there at the very end.
Yeah. We had to keep Lenny on the line.
All right.
Oh my God.
We need him to like record his own response to the Joe Riley thing at the end. Or maybe that's how we open up next episode.
Yes.
I think that's a better plan.
I agree.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining us again. It's great always to talk about PEBA stuff, and
fantastic.
we still got a long off season left. There's way too many sims left. We got plenty of time to talk about fun stuff. So
yeah, let's talk some more. We'll get some predictions.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.